I'm a third culture kid.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So born in India, raised in Singapore, moved to the US in my young adulthood.
Yeah.
And I have never been Indian enough, Singaporean enough, American enough to fit in these boxes.
Welcome to Syncreate, a show where we explore the intersections between creativity, psychology, and spirituality. One of our primary goals is to demystify the creative process and expand the boundaries of what it means to be creative. My guest today is Sharanya Rao. She's a coaching colleague of mine. We actually met back in 2013, did our coach training together, and have been colleagues ever since. Sharanya is originally from Singapore, and she had a career in law before becoming a coach. Her coaching practice focuses on leadership, career, and team coaching. And she is also the Artistic Director of Leela, an Indian community theater. And we're going to talk about a specific project today that she's working on called Anklets in the Boardroom. This project gives voice to South Asian women's experiences in the workplace and creating story circles around those experiences to create an interactive theater experience. So this project, to me, is a living example of everything that we are about at Syncreate in service of kind of using our creativity in community to facilitate positive social change. So, Sharanya, I'm so happy for you to be here with us today.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. It's so awesome to be here on your show.
Oh, yay. Yeah, it's so great to see you. It's been a minute since we got to be together.
Yeah.
So one of the things that made me inspired to reach out to you to come on the show, you recently posted on LinkedIn about kind of this rare moment when we arrive at the confluence of our passions. And so this project that you're working on now kind of brings together your creative passions, your coaching work, your DEI work. And so I'm curious if you can tell us, I really perked up when I heard that, especially how you're bringing these things together. And I'm curious, to hear more about those passions and how they're inspiring this project.
Yes, wow. I want to start with my own reflection as a coach.
Yeah.
I worked with so many clients on bringing their whole selves to work, and I really started thinking about, do I do that? Right? Do I bring all of my interests and passions together? And at the time it was no. Mm-hmm. Theater was a big part of who I was and what I loved, and I wasn't finding a way to bring that together.
Yeah.
Right. So I think this project feels magical for me because I really get to bring my whole self here.
Yeah.
And what it does, combines coaching and interactive theater on the theme of DEI. Mm-hmm. So Anklets in the Boardroom is an interactive theater project that amplifies South Asian women's voice and their experiences of discrimination in the workplace. And how we want to do that is in two phases. The first phase is really getting in community with other women, collecting stories, having them share their experiences, recording that, right, with permission. And then the next phase is showcasing that in the community through participatory theater. Right? So I'm bringing my coaching skills in the first phase of organizing the story circles and really setting up a safe space, because this is a sensitive topic. This
Absolutely.
is, not something, you may talk about at, a dinner or in a, social gathering, because there could be repercussions, right? And sometimes it's hard to talk about it at work too. And so what we want to do is design that safe space where people can feel comfortable to share some of their experiences and then also bring visibility, right? And allow people to feel heard.
Yeah.
Sometimes, you may have shared a story with a friend, with a spouse, and they're questioning it. They're like, are you sure that happened? maybe and you don't feel believed, you don't feel fully seen. So this is a space where we design, implicit trust, where your stories are going to be believed, and we are there, we're fully present, we're engaged in active listening, and we're designing confidentiality.
Yeah.
So that they feel comfortable. And I think it takes coaching skills to really design that space, right?
Yeah.
Where people can feel prepared to go deeper, and then also facilitate discussion. Because the other, in terms of our objectives, one is, first and foremost, to bring visibility and for people to allow to be heard. And then also to create a village of women that can lean on each other, that they can connect with each other, right? And then they can also start to play with the dynamics of power.
Yes.
Learn from each other, right? And coaching is a great tool to enable people and empower people.
Yeah.
And then my theater background comes in the second phase. I'm a writer, director. I think my sweet spot is really directing. And, I can't wait to stitch together the scenes to showcase that, right? And it's also a stretch for me in that this time it's going to engage people from the audience.
Yeah.
So they're not passive. They're not a passive audience. They're actually going to participate in the show.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's so much to that. It's a sort of complex, multi-phase project. Yeah. So for people who maybe aren't as familiar with this type of community participatory theater, I know you're drawing on, a few different particular influences, including Augusto Boal's Theater of the Oppressed. Can you share a little bit more about how some of these influences are coming together here?
Yes, absolutely. In terms of the background, I have a teaching diploma in speech and drama. And so when I entered grad school to do my Master's of Law in Dispute Resolution, one of the components was Theater of the Oppressed. And it was a way that dealt with conflict resolution, right? It's where creativity really meets social impact.
Yes.
Right. And so I took to it immediately because I already had a background in theater, and I was mind blown by, how we could weave in these different aspects, right, and then create social impact. And so that's where I was first exposed to it. And I loved the idea of, Augusto Boal talks about not having just spectators, but spectactors.
Yes.
Right? And so it's about giving audience agency, right, and helping them heal through that sense of agency. And when he took, the sort of the origins of this is, when Brazil was in a lot of civil strife, he took to street theater to go to different villages, right, to try and build community, and have them showcase the oppression, and have them suggest change, right? So they would step into the theater and they would act out what the outcome should be.
Yeah.
Right, and create dialogue. And so I loved that idea, and I've sought to bring it in different ways, in the last 10 years of coaching, and always, just didn't find the right opportunity. And so when I came across the book, Deepa Purushottamam's book, The First, the Few, the Only, in the book she talks about the power of community.
Yes.
And how to harness the power of community to create change. And she also talks about how women have, over generations always come together, right, and leaned on each other to create a safe space for change to happen, right? And so this is something that's a gift for us from our, traditions, and how we can harness this. And I thought, my gosh, wouldn't it be cool to engage women first in the storytelling, right? And then have them and others who, maybe, whether they're men or women, it doesn't matter, but have them be the agents of change, right? And experiment with that. Because when you think about it, if from what we know about psychology, right? If you have always if you've been oppressed, if you don't have a somatic sense of what power is, then how do you embody that?
Right.
And even if you know better, you may not be doing better.
Right.
Because you just don't have the wiring. Your body doesn't know how to stand in power. And Augusta Boal's work really gives that lab where people get to experiment with power.
Yeah.
And really sort of get it in the bones of what that means. Does it look like? What do I say? What should I do? How should I stand? And all of those subtle things. And the hope is that when they stand in power, when they experiment in a lab like interactive theater, then they can take that into the workplace.
Yeah. So it's a really embodied experience.
Yes.
Right? People getting to step into that place of power, see what that feels like. And I just love the way that you're bringing together kind of your creativity as a writer, as a theater person with your creative work, for the benefit of the community.
Yeah.
So I want to kind of take a little step backward. One of the things that I find inspiring about your story, you grew up in Singapore. In your bio, you describe yourself as a global citizen, and you've lived all over the world. And I'm just curious how these experiences have shaped your perspective in both your creative and professional work.
I'm a third culture kid.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So born in India, raised in Singapore, moved to the US in my young adulthood.
Yeah.
And I have never been Indian enough, Singaporean enough, American enough to fit in these boxes. Right. And I have spent a lifetime of being an outsider. And that has always sparked in me, inspired in me curiosity on how do people connect? How do they find common ground? What do people say and do, and how do they do it differently in order to connect?
Yeah.
Right? And so in grad school, I studied cross-cultural communication because that felt like a very integral part of dispute resolution, right? Like that's often where we come across conflict.
Yeah.
Because we're coming from different, maps altogether, right? And so of course there's a whole possibility of misunderstanding.
Yeah.
And that's one way I think I brought it in. And I wrote a paper on, the cultural vacuum in online dispute resolution. And I think I have been that voice, sometimes a dissenting voice, sometimes like the odd voice in the room that questions, right? Because I have a different lived experience.
Right.
Right. So often, like in trainings and workshops, when people say, well, this is the way to do it, I'll be the one to question that. Like, does that land in this culture? Like, have you considered this culture? And so I think I bring in my lived experience in a variety of different ways.
Yeah.
In those space, in the learning space for sure. And then, in coaching, it's really been more subtle.
Yeah.
I think what struck me was learning about limiting beliefs.
Yeah.
Right? And how sometimes culture can inform your limiting beliefs. How non-acceptance, not belonging somewhere, that can inform your limiting beliefs. And, I had to do some inner work, right, to unpack that for myself.
Sure.
So that I can then be with clients, especially, people of color, women leaders, to help them unpack theirs.
Yeah.
Right. So I think it forms the fabric of who I am.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think it's so important because, in creativity studies, for example, we know in team creativity and organizational creativity, it's so important to have a diverse array of perspectives. Because if everyone's thinking the same way, then you're not necessarily going to get to innovative solutions.
Absolutely.
But diversity can also create conflict.
Yeah.
Right? So how do you navigate that in a way that people are able to communicate effectively?
Absolutely. And I think that's also what drove my interest in conflict resolution.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then now, in the DEI body of work, I think I really had to reflect on what's my contribution going to be.
Yeah.
Right? Am I a trainer? Am I a consultant? And at the heart of it, I'm a coach.
Yeah.
And I wanted to use coaching in this space to bring value to people. And my area of focus is going to be creating inclusive teams.
Yeah.
Because, you talked about that, like when there is that psychological safety in a team, that's when you're going to see people perform to their fullest.
Exactly.
Right? You cannot, leaders cannot, drive better performance if people don't feel a sense of belonging to the team or the workplace, or they're not aligned and they don't feel seen or heard.
Right.
Then that's a number one contributor to employee burnout, to employee not having low employee retention, high turnover. And so that feels like a basic building block of a team, is having an inclusive space.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of my next frontier of work, is going to be focusing on creating inclusive teams.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking about some of the teams and organizations that I work with, or that I hear about from clients and colleagues, and just often how little attention is being paid to that.
Yeah.
Right? Or there might be organizations that have inherently diverse teams, but they don't necessarily focus on communication and conflict mediation, and they don't address difficult things head on.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely. Yeah, and designing systems of communication, right? In coach speak, we call this designing the alliance.
Yes.
Right? Like, how are we going to work together? How are we going to communicate? Are often omitted from the conversation.
Right.
Right. And so when I work with leaders, they're like, is this a thing you do? Is this something to talk about?
Yeah.
And I'm like, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because you're assuming everybody's on the same page.
Right.
And just given our diverse backgrounds, right, you may not be. And so it's important that, if you want to get people on the same page, to start with that initial discussion. Right. Of how are we going to be together?
Yeah.
Right. And so that everybody does feel seen and heard.
Definitely. Yeah. And I think along those same lines, I think, founders of startups or organizations, they're so focused on the task at hand or the product or service that they're developing, that they don't necessarily even think about, how are we all going to work together, And then they turn to us as coaches at some point, because they're like, well, something's not really working here, but we're not quite sure what it is, right?
Yeah. They come for troubleshooting.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Without realizing that there's actually a few steps back here.
Right.
That, if you had designed in the beginning, then when you get to this point, and conflict is inevitable.
Of course.
It's inevitable, right? And so if you have a system in place, then you can have healthy conflict.
Yeah.
Right? Conflict isn't bad.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think helping people understand, that it's okay to have difficult conversations.
Yeah.
It's actually productive if you go about it in the right way.
Yeah.
Right? And how to have those
Absolutely.
conversations. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I want to go a little bit more into your own creative background. So I know you got into writing and theater at a fairly early age. Tell us a little more about that.
Yeah, gosh. So I wrote, directed, and acted in my first play at 16. And, the topic was really dark for that time anyway. It was about child abuse. And so, it was a topic that fascinated me, and that I felt, I felt a strong connection to, in terms of the impact it had, right?
Yeah.
The social impact aspect of it. And it inspired me to write this play. And I think it took everybody by surprise, including myself.
Yeah.
That I was able to delve into a topic like that at the age of 16. And it was like, for a young, I think it was like a young people's theater festival. But being on stage, directing, writing, like it really, it created a magic for me that like I could only experience on stage. Right. And then I was involved in theater, through acting. And then I mentioned that I also taught speech and drama.
Yes.
So I did workshops and programs for children. And then another defining moment came in, I think, 2002, when I had, a larger scale production. It was on spiritual unfoldment.
Okay.
And it was called Yatra, or Journey into the Unknown. And it was about a spiritual journey, right? But it had, it was based in spirituality, like it had its roots in Vedanta. And it also brought in my other sort of, the other aspects of me, right? Like growing in Singapore and, different themes. And so it was really well received. And I remember when I was writing it and directing it, it was just a space of magic.
Yeah.
I can't even tell you. It was nothing that I ever experienced in anything that I did, right? And so I've always had a love for theater. And then when I moved to Austin, I really didn't find my groove here.
Yeah.
Right? I didn't resonate with some of the themes or the stories. I was also left with a feeling of like, where's the space for our stories?
Yeah.
Right? From our traditions, from the South Asian community. Like, where do we go and tell our stories? So I felt that there was a vacuum. And, I mentioned that, like, I've never ever felt like I belonged in one place. And my strategy has always been to create belonging.
Yes.
Right? So where it wasn't there, I created.
Yeah.
And so that was when I, decided that I really need to start Leela, and create a space where, people just like me, right, who may have day jobs and who may have pursued, or may have been told to pursue their professional interests, right? But they had a whole creative side to them that wasn't getting an avenue for expression.
Yeah.
That they could come together and together we could collaborate and create productions.
Yeah.
Right? So maybe it's one person who likes to write, one person who likes to direct, but, could never write, like, or, some person who likes to write music, but, doesn't want to act. But when we all come together in community, we can create a production.
Yeah.
Right? And that was when Leela was formed in 2012. It was also the time that I had my first kid. And that was, I think, a huge accountability for me, because up until then, I had been involved in theater and then took a hiatus and sort of came back to it. And that was when I decided that if I had to be in integrity with my child and tell her to pursue her passions, I needed to model that.
Yes.
Right? And that's
so
when...
important.
Yeah. So that's when Leela was formed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. So I love how now you're bringing it all together, right? Your creative work, theater, your professional work. So what is your vision for Anklets in the Boardroom? Like, how do you see it unfolding ultimately? So you're bringing women together to tell their stories in these story circles. And then ultimately there will be some kind of
production,
performance production that comes out of it.
Yeah. In the second phase, what we're going to do is take the stories and create scenes depicting these stories.
Okay.
Right? And in the first round, we'll showcase the stories as they are. And then in the second round, we'll showcase and give the audience the option to step in and intervene.
Yeah.
Right? And they can call stop.
Yeah.
They can say, well, don't say this, like say something else. They can replace characters.
Yeah.
Right? Because that's when we want them to really play with, like, what else could we do here?
Yeah.
Right? Like, what does power look like if we were to exercise power?
Yeah.
So I think we're aiming for like an hour and a half, probably an hour and a half production, maybe longer. Just but we're in the initial phase of just collecting the stories.
Yeah.
I don't want that to completely limit, right, what we can tell.
Yeah.
The time limit. So I think we're going to see how the stories unfold, have a rough idea of, about an hour and a half production. Ultimately, I would like to take this everywhere.
Yeah.
I would
Why
love,
not?
yeah. And, we're capturing here one set of stories. We could do this every year. There'd be enough stories to tell.
Definitely.
Definitely. We want to impact as many people as possible, right? And I'm really excited because I just got the news that the city of Austin is supporting us.
Great.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Yeah. Yes, I'm super excited. I'd love to take this, to take this concept.
Yeah.
Everywhere.
Yeah. So if people want to get involved, how can they find you? And you're doing, as I understand, some story circles in person in Austin, but you're doing some virtually as well.
Yeah.
So you don't have to be in the Austin
No,
area.
you don't have to be in the Austin area.
Okay.
Right now we have people from San Diego, from in the Eastern time zone, so you absolutely do not need to be located in Austin.
Great.
We are trying to see if there's an interest in doing an in-person circle, because I feel like you can build community more easily.
Yeah,
sometimes
there's an intimacy.
Yeah. So we're working on that, and then currently it's all virtual. They can send an email to austinleela@gmail.com.
And that's Leela.
Yes, correct.
Austin Leela. Okay.
austinleela@gmail.com.
Okay.
Or send me an email, Sharanya@kindlelifecoaching.com.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we'll definitely share those links
Yeah.
with our audience when the episode comes out.
Yeah.
Well, it's so wonderful having you here today. And I'm curious, just by way of closing, what really inspires me about all of this, again, is, how you're bringing together your own passions and bringing the community into this participatory, interactive experience. What advice would you have maybe for other people that are feeling inspired to kind of channel their own creativity to some greater purpose like this?
That's such a great question. I would actually say creativity begins with purpose.
Yeah. Yeah.
When you have a clear sense of who you are, what you want to do in this world, how you want to leave your mark, right? What you were born to do.
Yeah.
Right? I think the creativity just flows.
Yeah.
Right? Oftentimes we maybe work the other way around and try to do something creative, which it is possible. It's not been my journey. My journey has always started with purpose.
Yeah.
Right? Again, even from when I started theater, right? When I was passionate about the impact of child abuse, it inspired creativity.
Yeah.
Right? When I was inspired about spiritual unfoldment, right? Spiritual transformation, it inspired another production.
Yeah.
Right? I'm passionate about DEI, and it has inspired this. So creativity follows purpose.
Yeah. And then things have a way of taking on a life of their own. Right? And I think for so many of us, it's a little bit about getting out of our own way.
Yes.
And also kind of clearing out maybe those external societal expectations of what people think we should be doing with ourselves, or, but I think you're, finding purpose, finding your passion, and then there's this energy that comes out of it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Absolutely. One of the books that I recently read gave me a lot of energy was Elizabeth Gilbert's Big Magic.
Yeah.
And it really helped me refocus on creativity.
Yeah.
Because for a while, again, I had 2 young children, and then I was building my coaching practice, and I had left theater behind a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. And after reading her book, it just landed for me that if creativity is one of my values, then it has to be somewhere in my life.
Yes.
I have to create space for it. And then I was like, well, how do I create space for it? I'm already a mom. I already, like, where do I put this
time
in?
of the day? Yeah.
And the answer was, well, maybe creativity needs to be your work.
Yeah.
You know, and it just landed for me how important it was, and how I wasn't being fully myself if it wasn't present in my life.
Yeah.
If it wasn't honored.
Yeah.
That is what led to actually, really cleared the path for Anklets in the Boardroom.
Yeah.
Because I was like, oh, I can do this.
Yeah.
Right? Like, this becomes my work.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, and again, like, it starts with, why am I here? What am I born to do?
Yeah.
Right? I'm born to do this work, and then you feel sort of the flood of creativity, and people start to speak to you. Books start to speak to you.
Right.
Like,
Everything starts kind of coming together in a really interesting ways. Yeah. And I love this. And I mean, I think creativity always is about bringing something into being that didn't exist before. And each of us has our own unique way of doing that, and our own way of expressing ourselves. Like, only you can tell your story. Only you can bring your creativity together in this very particular way. And I think, part of what we're trying to do in this show, in this podcast, is say that, creativity doesn't look any one way. And we all have it, and we can all utilize it to do great things in the world.
Yeah, it is as unique as we are.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
It is as unique as our fingerprints.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's
Thanks for the
wonderful
opportunity
to have you here. Yeah.
Likewise.
Great. So I'm going to do a little outro.
Okay.
Back to the camera. Okay. So it's been wonderful having Sharanya here. And if you're interested in getting more involved with her project, Anklets in the Boardroom, we'll provide links to all her sites and ways of contacting her. And just want to leave you with that message, that we all have a unique creative gift to share. So really encourage each of you to explore what that means for you. Thanks for joining us today. And you can find Syncreate online at www.syncreate.org and find out more about all that we do.